Good morning. Barry Bryson here, thanking you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. As you can see, we're still in the Family Bible Class studios. We'll return to our 5 good minute studios after we finish our study of the book of Habakkuk, which we will study after our next session. We'll finish that study after our next session. We're in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3. Habakkuk has looked around at the sinfulness around him, the social injustice, the violence, the immorality, the disrespect for God's law, and he said to God, how long are you going to look at this and not do anything about it? God's reply was, I am going to do something about it. I'm going to take my people into Babylonian captivity. And then he had a second question, which was, how can you do this? Because they're worse than we are. And God said, listen, this is going to happen. The just shall live by faith. I'm going to destroy them too for their sins. But I'm in my holy temple. And your response to that is to be silent before me. Verse 20 of chapter 2. And so, the prophet Habakkuk is not literally obedient to what God told him to do in verse 20 because he keeps talking. In fact, he starts singing and praying. But he does keep it because he yields to God's will, absolutely, wholeheartedly, with clear eyes, seeing what is about to happen, what is on the horizon. And so we're going to look at the song that he sings today, verses 1 through 15, and then his response to everything that he's learned. I want to read verses 1 through 3. Oh, let's look at verses 1 and 2 first. It says, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet according to Shigionot. Lord, I have heard the report about you and I fear. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. God comes from Timon and his Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. Okay, I wanted to read that far to get to the word Selah, which is in this text 3 times. So he calls it a prayer, and it is a prayer, because it is him speaking directly to God about what he has heard from God and his expression of faith in what he's heard. But it's also a song, because it's to the tune of Shigionot, which is a phrase we know from the Psalms. And we're not sure what it means. It probably means something like, with great emotion, with great expression, that this is not something to be sung, quietly or without any expression of feeling. It's probably what Shigionot means, with great feeling. And he says to God, addressing him directly, by name, Yahweh. Yahweh, I've heard the report about you, and I fear. And he really is afraid. He's respectful and reverent, but he's also afraid, because he says in verse 16, he's trembling on the inside. He really is afraid of what's about to happen. And he says, revive your work in the midst of years, meaning God's people. Bring us back at some point. And in wrath, remember mercy. And the whole prophetic tradition up to this point has been God saying he was going to do this. Even with the northern kingdom, Hosea chapter 11, I'm not going to come to you in my great anger. I'm not giving you what you deserve. Even in this moment of captivity, I'm going to be extending grace to you. And so he's asking for something that he can fully expect to receive based upon the prophets who have gone before him. Verse 3, he gives us some geographical places. Timon, Mount Paran, and he talks later on about Cushan as well in verse 7. Now these places, geographic places, represent nations on their southern and southeastern frontier, like the Edomites, who will participate with the Babylonians in the sack of Jerusalem. And you can read about that in Psalm 137. I keep mentioning Psalm 137. The Edomites were there working with the Babylonians, and they rejoiced in the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, and they were yelling out, tear it down, tear it down. So Timon and Mount Paran, we're talking about Edomites, Cushan on that frontier as well. And so he understands some real specifics about what captivity and the destruction of Jerusalem is going to look like. And then for the rest of verses 3 through 15, which I'm not going to read, he describes God and his power in bringing about judgment, not only upon his people, but upon the Babylonians, as the unparalleled mighty warrior. And in the same way that Paul, in Ephesians chapter 6, describes the whole armor of God and uses a Roman soldier and his equipment to do so, Habakkuk is really describing a Babylonian soldier in describing God as an unparalleled warrior. The main thing I want us to see in verse 13 is this understanding. You go forth for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. That's so important. That phrase, an understanding, is such a New Testament verse. Everything you're doing to save us. Everything you're doing for your anointed. Your anointed, reaching all the way back to David, whose king is supposed to be eternal, and to the Messiah. Because what does the word Messiah mean? It means God's anointed one. That's the word in this verse. The word Messiah is in this verse, for the salvation of your Messiah, your anointed one. Everything is happening so that the Messiah can come and bring us salvation. And he understands that. But he's going to have to live through the storm of it before all that happens. And that's what he'll talk about next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 Good Minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We'll see you next time.